In the dim room, Emily, kneeling in front of a single candle, whispered a prayer in the darkness, hoping for guidance. The flickering flame trembled, casting elongated shadows on the walls. A cold, metallic taste filled the air, as though the very room had become charged with unseen energy. Emily's heart raced as the shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe, contorting against the light. A deep vibration suddenly resonated through the floorboards, reverberating through her chest. She gripped the edge of the table as the candle's flame stretched unnaturally, growing higher and more intense. Then the candle burst into cold white fire, flooding the room with an overwhelming brightness. It was as though the light had a life of its own. Out of this light emerged a tall, shifting silhouette, its edges glimmering like molten silver. Emily could not move. There was no wind, no footsteps, just the unblinking weight of unseen eyes. And then, a voice boomed inside her chest, "You have been seen." The words left an indelible mark upon her soul, reverberating inside her long after the light faded. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Emily sitting in the center of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced, her breath shallow as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Was it a dream? Or something more? The voice, the presence, it all felt too real to dismiss. But why had it chosen her? She glanced around the room, as though expecting the figure to reappear. But there was nothing. Just the flickering candle and the eerie silence that now seemed even more oppressive. The silence was broken only by the faint ticking of a clock in the corner, a sound that felt too loud in the stillness. Her hands trembled as she reached out to extinguish the candle. The thought of facing that unknown presence again filled her with both dread and a strange sense of urgency. "I must understand," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breathing. But deep inside, a fear she couldn't ignore took root. As Emily slowly rose from the floor, her legs shaky from the intensity of the experience, a knock at the door startled her. It was the faithful guide, a figure she had not expected, yet she knew, deep down, that he was part of what she was now facing. The guide's presence had always been comforting, even if she hadn't sought him out before. He was a man of faith, always calm and collected, someone who seemed to hold the answers to every question, though she had never dared ask. But now, standing in the doorway, he felt like a beacon of stability amidst the chaos. His eyes softened as he looked at Emily, sensing the turmoil inside her. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Emily nodded, unsure of how to explain the overwhelming feelings of dread and awe that gripped her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, before he stepped forward. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly, "and now, you must face it." Emily's mind raced as the faithful guide's words settled in. "You must choose," he said. But what choice was there? The path of vengeance, or the road of faith? She had lived with anger, with a hunger for justice, and now it seemed she was being asked to surrender it all. The faith she had once lost seemed impossible to regain, and yet, in this moment, it felt like her only option. She wanted to lash out, to demand answers, but instead, she found herself listening to him. The guide was speaking of a higher purpose, a faith that transcended human understanding. But how could she, a broken soul, ever find that peace? Her heart ached with doubt. She had been wronged, and revenge had consumed her thoughts for so long. Could she truly let go? The guide's presence brought a strange sense of calm, but the weight of her choices hung heavy on her chest. "You have the strength," he assured her, sensing her hesitation, "but it starts with faith." Later that evening, Emily stood by the window, staring out into the night, lost in thought. The decision was hers, but could she trust herself to make the right one? Her mind was filled with questions, but the answers felt out of reach. The guide had left, but his words lingered, echoing in her heart. She thought back to the life she once had, before the darkness crept in and consumed her. She had been a different person then, someone who believed in love and faith. But now, that seemed like a distant memory, a life that could never return. The desire for vengeance had become an all-consuming fire. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she knew that it was not the path she wanted to follow. But how could she walk away from it? A deep breath escaped her lips as she whispered to herself, "I have to believe." Days passed since the encounter, but Emily couldn't shake the lingering unease. Her mind was filled with turmoil, torn between what the faithful guide had said and the need for justice she felt deep within. Thought of vengeance still haunted her, and a part of her wanted to return to the darkness she knew, to seek out the one who wronged her. Yet another part of her wanted peace, but peace felt too distant, too foreign. She had lived with anger for so long, it felt impossible to let go. But the more she thought about it, the more her heart ached. Was revenge really the answer? Could she find healing, or would it simply lead her further down a path of destruction? The next morning, Emily met with the faithful guide again. His steady gaze was a reminder of the peace she so desperately sought, but she couldn't ignore the doubt that still gnawed at her. "I cannot forget," Emily admitted, her voice quiet. "The wrong that was done to me. It keeps me awake at night, and I don't know how to move past it." The faithful guide nodded, his face compassionate but firm. "Forgiveness is not forgetting," he replied softly. "It is letting go of the hold it has over you. Revenge will only bind you further to the past." Emily's heart pounded. Could she truly let go of the pain and the desire for retribution? The days grew heavier for Emily. She was torn between the words of the faithful guide and the pull of her own pain. She had always believed that justice meant punishment, that vengeance was the only way to make things right. But now, the path to forgiveness felt like walking through a fog. In one moment, she felt certain that forgiveness was the right choice. The next, doubt and anger clouded her mind. She sat by the window that evening, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Her reflection in the glass seemed like a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. She had changed, but had she changed enough? One evening, as Emily walked through the streets, lost in thought, she was confronted by the one who had caused her pain. He stood there, as if waiting for her. His eyes were filled with regret, but Emily could see the guilt in his posture. "Emily," he said softly, his voice filled with shame. "I know I cannot undo what I've done, but I am truly sorry. I was wrong." Her heart pounded, and for a moment, she stood frozen. Anger surged within her, and she could feel the old desire for revenge awaken. But then, something shifted. The weight of his apology and the years of pain she had carried began to settle within her. She wanted to scream, but instead she found herself asking, "Why now?" The confrontation with her past left Emily with more questions than answers. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the choice before her. Forgiveness felt impossible, but holding on to her anger felt like an even greater burden. She had spent so long seeking retribution, yet the weight of her rage was suffocating. Emily knew that the path to peace would not be easy, but she also knew it was the only way forward. She had to choose. Could she find the strength to forgive, to break free from the chains of resentment and find a new way forward? As Emily sat in her room, the weight of her decision bore down on her. The words of the faithful guide echoed in her mind. Forgiveness is not forgetting. She had been wrestling with the truth for days, and though the path was uncertain, she felt something shifting within her. A deep internal stir, like a spark that might ignite into something greater. She wasn't sure how or when, but the idea of letting go of her rage seemed less like an impossibility now and more like a fragile thread she could hold on to. Her heart, once consumed with vengeance, now craved peace, but the journey was still unclear. The light of understanding flickered within her, casting away some of the darkness that had clung to her for so long. It was a moment of clarity, but it felt fragile, as though it could vanish if she didn't act on it soon. The next morning, Emily found herself walking to the park, her feet heavy with uncertainty. She had made the decision to try and forgive, to walk away from the anger that had ruled her life for so long. But with every step, doubt crept back in. Was forgiveness really the answer? Could she truly move on from the hurt? As she walked along the winding path, her mind raced. She remembered the days when all she could think about was vengeance, when every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of retribution. The shift in her heart felt so new, so fragile, and yet she could feel the strength in it growing little by little. She paused by the lake, taking in the stillness, as if the world around her was waiting for her to make the next move. The ripples on the water mirrored the turmoil inside her. Emily's thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind her. She turned to see the redeemed soul, a woman in her 40s who had experienced her own painful journey of redemption. "You are not alone in this," the redeemed soul said, her voice calm and understanding. She had been a source of strength for Emily in the past, and now she seemed to offer something deeper, a shared understanding of what it meant to let go of the past. "Forgiveness is a process," the redeemed soul continued. "It's not easy, but it is possible. Every step you take toward healing is a victory." Emily listened, her heart swelling with both gratitude and a new sense of hope. The redeemed soul's words grounded her, reminding her that she didn't have to carry the weight of her pain alone. With a deep breath, Emily nodded, knowing that this was the path she had to take. That evening, Emily returned to her apartment, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. She was sitting in her living room when the skeptic, her longtime friend, called. "Emily, you're really going to forgive him after everything he did to you?" His voice was filled with disbelief, and she could hear the confusion in his tone. "How can you just let it go?" he pressed, unable to understand. Emily took a deep breath before replying, her voice steady but resolute. "I'm not forgetting what happened," she said softly. "I'm just choosing to not let it control me anymore. I can't live in the past forever." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then the skeptic, after a long pause, muttered, "I don't get it, but I guess you have to do what feels right." Emily smiled faintly. It wasn't a complete understanding, but it was a step forward. The following day, Emily decided to visit the person who had caused her so much pain. She had made peace with her decision, or so she thought. As she approached the door, her heart began to race, and the old fears resurfaced. What if her decision was wrong? What if forgiveness wasn't enough? She stood before the door for several moments, uncertain. Finally, she knocked. When the door opened, Emily was met with a surprised but cautious look from the man. His eyes flickered to her face, then down to the ground, and he said quietly, "I never thought I'd see you again." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with the weight of the moment. She wasn't there for revenge, but for closure, for peace. "I'm here because I need to let go," she said, her voice steady. "Not for you, but for me." The man stood silently for a moment, then stepped aside. The door opened, and Emily took her first step into a new chapter. Emily sat alone in her apartment that evening, a calmness settling over her. She had made the decision. She would face her past head-on. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but she had chosen it, not just for her peace, but because she realized that holding on to the bitterness only imprisoned her further. The memory of her past, of the wrong done to her, still stung, but the desire for revenge had faded. She had come to understand that true freedom lay in releasing the grip of anger. As she sat, deep in thought, a soft knock at the door interrupted her. She knew who it was. It was time. Time to confront her past face to face. No more running, no more hiding. She took a deep breath and stood, her hands slightly trembling, but her resolve firm. Tonight, she would choose healing. The door opened, and there he stood, the man who had caused her so much pain. The years had not been kind to him. The weight of his guilt showed in his tired eyes and slumped shoulders. Emily could feel the storm of emotions rising within her, but this time it was different. The anger that had once consumed her seemed distant, like a forgotten echo. She stood there, her voice steady but calm as she spoke. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. "I'm here to heal." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. He had expected anger, perhaps even resentment, but not this. "I didn't think you'd ever forgive me," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes remained steady. "Forgiveness is not for you," she said softly. "It's for me." Emily listened intently as the man spoke, his words filled with regret and sorrow. For the first time she could see the humanity in him, not the monster that had haunted her for so long. His confession was raw, painful, but it was necessary. "I don't expect you to ever forgive me fully," he said, his voice breaking. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. I can never take back what I did, but I want you to have peace. I ruined both of our lives, and I'm sorry for it." Emily stood silent for a moment, processing the weight of his words. Ow! She had spent years wishing for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt a surprising sense of calm. The path she had been walking had led her here, and now she could see that this was the beginning of her healing. After the conversation, Emily found herself outside, walking along the same path she had walked days ago. She had let go of the burden she had carried for so long. The weight of the anger, the hatred, had finally lifted. She still felt the pain of the past, but now it was just a scar, a part of who she was, not something that defined her. As she walked, she realized that forgiveness was not just about letting go of someone else's wrongs. It was about reclaiming her own peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but she had taken the first step. With each step she took, the world around her felt just a little bit lighter. The next few days were filled with quiet reflection. Emily spent time with friends, revisited old hobbies, and allowed herself to breathe. She no longer carried the weight of her past with her everywhere she went. One evening, as she sat on her balcony, the city stretched out before her, calm and serene. For the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of peace. The path of forgiveness had led her to a place of freedom. The anger that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Emily knew that she would never forget what had happened, but she also knew that she didn't have to carry it any longer. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, she felt whole. It had been days since Emily had made peace with her past, but now, standing at the edge of a new challenge, she realized that peace wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. A phone call had come in the early hours of the morning, and it was the man who had once wronged her. "I need your help," he had said, his voice filled with desperation. Emily hadn't heard from him in years. He explained that his life had spiraled out of control, and he was now in danger. He needed someone to help him out of the mess he had made, and for a moment, Emily hesitated. Her heart ached with the desire to refuse, to protect herself from the pain he had caused. But deep down, she knew what the right thing to do was. If forgiveness meant anything, it meant showing compassion, even when it was difficult. This was her test. Emily stood at the edge of the alley, the cold wind cutting through her jacket as she waited. Her breath was visible in the chill, but the discomfort wasn't from the cold. It was the situation she found herself in. Her eyes scanned the shadows, waiting for the man she had once forgiven, the man who had betrayed her so many years ago. When he appeared, he was disheveled and trembling, his eyes hollow with regret. "I didn't think you'd come," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I didn't think I deserved your help." Emily looked at him, her gaze steady, yet filled with compassion. "You don't need to deserve it," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You need to want to change. I'm here to help, but it's up to you to take the first step." As they made their way to the car, Emily felt the familiar weight of doubt creeping back in. Could she really help him? Could she trust him again? These questions plagued her as the man sat beside her, his silence speaking volumes. The drive was long, and the city around them passed by in a blur of streetlights and darkness. "I don't know why you're doing this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, I don't deserve your help." Emily glanced at him, her grip on the steering wheel tight but steady. "You may not deserve it, but that doesn't matter," she replied. "We don't do the right thing because we deserve it. We do it because it's the right thing." The words hung in the air, but Emily felt a deep sense of clarity wash over her. This was her choice. This was her sacrifice. She was willing to take this step, even if it was painful. When they arrived at the building, Emily could feel her heart race in her chest. They were standing on the precipice of something irreversible. She had offered her help, but now the reality of the situation was settling in. The man stood in front of her, looking at her with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Emily didn't know how much he had changed, how much he truly wanted to make amends. But she was willing to trust him. "This is your last chance," she said firmly. "What happens next is up to you." With that, she turned and walked away, the weight of the decision finally starting to feel real. She had chosen to help, but she also knew that his journey was his own. The next morning, Emily sat on her balcony, looking out over the city. She had made the choice to help him, but it hadn't come without cost. The weight of the past still lingered, and as she sat there in the silence, she realized that the true sacrifice was not in the action itself, but in the willingness to let go of everything she had once held onto. She didn't need gratitude or acknowledgement. She had done the right thing. As the sun rose, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, Emily knew that this was her final test. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was free. Free from the chains of her past, and free to live her life with the clarity she had longed for. The following days brought a deep sense of reflection for Emily. She had come so far, but something in her still felt incomplete. There was still a weight inside her, a whisper that called to her from somewhere deep within her soul. She had found forgiveness, peace, and healing, but something about her past kept pulling her back, like a string tethering her to a place she had already left behind. Late one evening, as she sat by the window looking out at the darkened city, the silence was broken by a soft voice, one she had not heard in a long time. "Emily," it said, almost like a whisper in the wind. Her heart skipped a beat. She had thought she was alone, but now, in this stillness, she realized something had changed. The voice came again, clear this time, resonating within her chest like a quiet thunder. "You have been seen." Emily's heart raced as she stood, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure if the voice was real or a product of her mind, but it felt undeniably real. "Who is this?" she whispered into the empty room, her voice echoing back at her. She felt the air in the room shift, grow thicker, as though the atmosphere itself was changing. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and her breath caught in her throat. The moment was surreal, but somehow, Emily knew. It was the divine messenger, the one who had been guiding her silently from the beginning. She was not alone, and the time for the final revelation had come. In a sudden burst of light, the room seemed to pulse, and before her stood a figure, tall and radiant. The light emanating from them was both blinding and comforting. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief, but her heart knew it to be true. "Do not fear," the divine messenger's voice rang out, filling the room. "You have done well, Emily. You have chosen the path of peace and forgiveness. But there is more you must understand." The words resonated in her soul, shaking her to her core. The figure's form was ethereal, a shimmering silhouette of divine energy. The room was filled with a warmth and light, unlike anything Emily had ever experienced, and yet it did not blind her. She felt a deep, calming presence, as though the universe itself was embracing her. The journey was not over, it was just beginning. The messenger's voice filled the space around her, both comforting and overwhelming. "You have not just forgiven yourself and others, Emily. You have broken the chains that bound your soul. But now you must step into your true purpose." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had known that something was waiting for her, something beyond forgiveness. The weight of her past had prepared her for this moment, yet the true nature of her purpose still eluded her. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. The messenger's gaze softened. "You must now share your light with others, show them the path to healing as you have found. You will be a guide, just as you were once guided." Emily felt a deep, spiritual calling stir within her, as though a doorway had opened in her soul, inviting her to step into something much larger than herself. The fear that once gripped her heart began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose. The light of the messenger began to fade, but its presence lingered, etched into Emily's soul. She stood there, breathing deeply, feeling a sense of profound transformation wash over her. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. The fear, the doubts, the pain, everything had been released. And now, she was ready to begin the next chapter. "Go forth, Emily," the divine messenger's voice echoed softly as the light receded into the distance. "You are ready." The room returned to its natural state, but Emily stood in awe, a deep sense of peace settling in her heart. She wasn't the same person who had started this journey. She had become something greater, someone who could guide others to find their own path to peace. She knew that her journey had just begun. Emily stood at the edge of a vast field, the wind gently rustling through the tall grasses. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the horizon. She had walked this path many times before, but today felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, a quiet understanding that her journey was coming to an end. Yet it felt like the beginning of something even greater. The road she had walked, full of pain, growth, and transformation, had led her to this moment. Her heart was full, not of regret, but of peace. She had learned that healing was not a destination, but a continuous journey, one that she would continue to walk every day. As she looked out at the vast expanse before her, she whispered softly to herself, "I am ready." Later, Emily sat on a bench in a park, watching the world go by. She had begun to speak at local meetings, sharing her story with others, offering guidance and support to those who, like her, had been lost. It wasn't about seeking fame or recognition. It was about offering a hand to those who needed it most. The people she spoke to listened intently, their eyes filled with hope as they saw in her the possibility of redemption. Emily had become a beacon of light, not because of anything special she had done, but because she had chosen to share the truth of her own healing. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride as she realized how far she had come. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was no longer afraid to walk it. As the weeks passed, Emily's life became a routine of sharing, healing, and supporting others. But one day, while she was walking through the same park, she met someone who had been struggling with the very same demons she had once faced. His eyes were filled with pain, and he hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to let go," he said, his voice cracking. "How did you do it?" Emily paused, her heart aching for him. She understood his struggle all too well. She smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "It takes time, patience, and most of all, faith. And when you're ready, you'll find the strength to forgive, to move forward." The man looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. It was in that moment that Emily realized the true power of her journey. She wasn't just healing herself. She was helping others find their own paths to redemption. In the days that followed, Emily continued to meet people from all walks of life, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories of pain. She shared her story with them, but more than that, she listened. She gave them a safe space to share their fears and hopes, offering her support as they worked through their own struggles. Emily's heart grew even more open as she connected with others on a deeper level. Her own journey had taught her that healing wasn't about fixing people. It was about creating a space for them to heal themselves. As she sat with one of the individuals she had helped, she realized that her life had transformed completely. The person she had once been, angry, lost, afraid, was now a distant memory. She had become someone new, someone who could offer hope and light in a world that often felt dark. The final moment came unexpectedly. Emily had spent years walking the path of healing, forgiveness, and growth, but as she stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life, she realized there was one final lesson to learn. It was a simple truth, yet it held the power to change everything. Peace comes from within. She whispered the words to herself as the wind blew softly around her. She had found her purpose, her calling. But most importantly, she had found herself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stood tall, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. The road ahead would continue, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. She was at peace, and that was all she needed.